Hello, everybody, and welcome to What Does Today Say? What do I say? Sometimes I wonder about that myself. Anyway, we're going to cover concepts, education, and knowledge, and how it all started. Several years ago, when I started this video podcast, we did it for fun, crazy things. Old episodes showed Halloween. I was dressed as a crazy Russian scientist. My chemist, Bien, was dressed up like Igor with the big hump on the back. Yes, Foster. It was hilarious. And we got a lot of attention. But since then, it's become more serious because the information that I have to put out is based on 56 years of being in the industry of aesthetics and medical aesthetics. Now our studio has a social media manager who writes scripts. It has a movie director, Seth Harden, who directs movies and things like that, who's actually filming this right now. And so they've given me this whole rundown of what I need to talk about today in the DMK legacy of education. You know, education, and I was just thinking about this the other night, education is what we've always sold all these years. Many of you who have attended my lectures over the years, or even recently, have heard me say that products are nothing. They're just tools. Now, I happen to think that I have put together the best tools possible, but the first consideration is education and concept. I think the education started back in the 80s. I always, it's so funny. I was in Chicago in my clinic, and it was on Pearson Street, right off of Michigan Avenue, in an old historical house called Hartwell House. And for some reason or another, I drew the attention of the owners of a beauty school downtown, and it was mostly black students. They also had one out in the south side of Chicago. And there was no esthetician license in those days in Illinois. It was just cosmetologist, hair, et cetera, et cetera. There was makeup, massage, that kind of thing, but not esthetician. And yet I was teaching black students in a beauty school all about their skin and how to work with it, how to circumvent razor bump syndrome, all the things that are inherent in the black community at that time, things that we are going to be using today. I was teaching these kids. It was such a strange phenomenon. There was no certification. I think eventually I had to buy those certificate things and give them to each young person. But that's what I always have done. I've always First, when a client comes in for a treatment, I would explain everything to them scientifically, how the skin really worked, and then I would go through the diagnostic, and then I would reiterate what they do at home and the reasons why. So it was always an educational process. That's how it actually started. There was no day. I know that a lot of people ask me now, when did you launch this or when did you start that? Nothing ever was launched per se. My whole career has actually sort of evolved over the decades. All right. Right here they ask, DMK brand concept and origin story. When did your personal business start becoming a concept-oriented brand? Well, I never paid much attention to the word brand because back in those days, to me, brand meant L'Oreal or over-the-counter type things. And brand also meant a lot of marketing hype, nothing to do with real science. But as time went by, I think somewhere in the 2000s, because we started overseas in Europe. First it was Danné Montague King, and then it became DMK. And I remember at the time looking at Donna Karan. She was the height of fashion in those days. And she changed her company to DKNY. And I thought, that sounds modern and slick. And I feel that we're on the verge of becoming an international brand. So let's call it DMK. Forget me. Take me out of the picture because I'm not going to be around forever. There's going to be other people take my place. So why focus on me? And I simply became Danné, like Cher. I kind of like, a little bit like Cher in many ways. Actually, she's quite an extraordinary woman. She really liked my makeup, but that's another story. The first distributor was Karen and Ed Kroll in Pittsburgh, up in Pennsylvania. And that's about the time I formulated BioFreeze. Now, I know a lot of you at some time in your life have used biofreeze. I still see it on television, very sophisticated ads, and it's so weird to me to think, I did that. If I weren't born, biofreeze would not exist, in all the pharmaceutical companies and all those chiropractors and all those users all over the world would not have it. It's so strange. It's like watching that movie every Christmas, It's a Wonderful Life, when he thought, I wish I was never born, and then it showed what things would have been like had he not been born. And that's kind of like me. I'm nothing special. I just was born. I happen to have this weird high IQ. I learned that when I was in private school, what that meant. And recently, I just went through a 3-day executive scan at the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio, because I'm 80 years old now, and I wanted to see just how much gas I have left in the tank to keep going, right? And so they scanned everything. It's 3 days, amazing stuff. And good heart, good lungs, good everything. Brain shrinkage minimal, and bone density 55 to 60. That's what the analysis came out. But they also redid my intellectual quotient, and it was still 167, 68. But now they subtitle it into categories of so-called genius, and mine was creative and analytical. And I guess that's how I've done this all these years. Yes, I can put things together, but I ask questions all my whole life, even in school. I remember as a little boy, there was a teacher named Mr. Fremont, big ginger-haired guy. Didn't like him at all, red face, big nose. And I would question everything he said in the class. And one day he literally screamed at me in front of all the kids. He goes, Danné, shut up. You're an old man in a little boy's body. So I guess that's true. I always question every single thing until we come to some answers, because everything does work symbiotically. Nothing is, this product is the best, or that has the latest buzzword ingredient, or whatever. It all has to work. I've always used the body as the lab. So Ed and Karen Kroll took on the distribution. I went back and forth to Pittsburgh many, many times. They're still there, and we still have a lot of clinics, some of them from the old days. I remember those first educations. Karen Kroll was the first licensed esthetician in Pennsylvania. Like Chicago, or like Illinois, it didn't have a special esthetician's course. And they got one, and I told her to enroll so she wouldn't be therapist dependent. And so she did, and she graduated, first one in the state. And the school, under the direction of Dr. Mimi Hoffman, took on DMK. In those days, it was Danné. And I'll never forget visiting the school and seeing posters that they had around of all of our treatments and everything. And we had no syllabus just for schools. As a matter of fact, I paid Dr. Hoffman a good sum of money to write my very first professional syllabus for tests, for classes, way back in the day. And I'm sure, Karen, if you see this, you're smiling, because this is all the things that did happen. So there was never roll out. It just sort of happened by circumstance, and I think it happened because I always focused on education as opposed to products. When did DMK's skin revision approach expand beyond products and treatment into a dedicated aesthetic school of thought? Well, it's one and the same. It was always that way. It didn't expand into it. It just expanded around the world. We have top educators like Elizabeth Stenvik of Norway, God rest her soul. She was one of the most brilliant educators that I've ever had the pleasure to have. Everything I said, everything I mentioned in any class going over there, she would write down in Norwegian and had in manila folders and a shelf all around her office. One day I said, what are all those folders? Her nickname was Hexa. She goes, this is everything you ever said in Norwegian. I was like, whoa. I mean, it's amazing when you have people in the field working with you, also asking questions and researching and so on. So a lot of these things that we do now, our treatments, for instance, did not come from this old brain. It came from people in the field working practically, working logically, and also doing research and contributing it back to me, or back to headquarters. That's how we kind of built the educational format. Then along came Debbie Dixon of DMK Australia, one of the best educators of all times. I'll never forget a young Debbie telling me, oh, I'll never be able to get up and talk in front of people like you do. I said, yes, you will, and on top of that, you'll be an international star. And she is, to this day. one of our very best contributing educators. So you see, it went like that, person to person, message to message, each country contributing in its own way, just on the basic concept that I put forth to them in the beginning. How did RRPM, that's a very clever marketing device. Remove, rebuild, protect, maintain. I made that up a long time ago when some, I think it was a reporter, asked me, what do you do? What can you do with your treatments? And I said, well, there's only 4 categories that anybody can do. I don't care whether it's medically, whether it's another company, whatever. It's always about remove all the damage that's accrued over time, rebuild the living cells that are left behind to their maximum potential, remove, rebuild, protect. Ozone layer's going away, folks. It's never coming back. More carcinogenic potential is pouring through, solar damage, pollution, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to protect our work, and then maintain. Maintain is what everybody does at home, because there's no professional treatment that we do that is not without its home prescriptives. It just won't work. There's no one-off. It takes time and progression to get a final result. It's not a quick fix. Those things don't work. They have a brief flash of popularity, and psh, next trend comes up next 6 months, next year, whatever. Tell us about the research, development, and impermeation process behind DMK's first educational program rollout. Well, these kids. A millennial wrote this. God bless him. That's our future, by the way, folks. I think what he's referring to here is our programs that we insist on for anybody to become a DMK practitioner. And that starts with program 1, and that has to be attended, passed, certified. And then there are auxiliary programs, and then there is the paramedical, which allows for the more in-depth treatments and so on. But they cannot buy products or do anything if they don't take all of those. Let's say someone completes program 1. Can they get started? Yes, they can get started in a limited way. They can do good work, but they have to do program 2 or paramedical to complete the whole thing before we let them have certain formulas. It's just a question of efficacy and also insurance, and also being careful with the client. Tell us about the research and development process behind DMK's first educational program rollout. Actually, it all stemmed from we call it the White Manual. It's a manual that I wrote years and years and years and years ago. I liked that manual. It had little tabs in it for all the theory, histology, chemistry, anatomy, all the things that led up to the products themselves, the protocols, how to use them, and so on. And since then, other educators have jumped in, and we've hired people. Lately, Dr. J. Laconde, to flesh out the education until it's even more in-depth, more scientific. And now it's at a point where I look at some of the manual content in the DMK MD, and it's like you almost have to go to medical school to understand this. But we teach it, and the therapists will read it. At first, they're daunted. They go, oh, my God. And then after a while, it starts to sink in. Because after all, the $25 words used in science that describe things are just words and acronyms that follow it. And it's show-off lingo. The concept behind it is pretty simple. So my job in these educational formats is to analogize everything so people can understand it. So they go, oh, okay, I know what that means. All right, so the process took a lot of people lately. It wasn't just me. It takes a village. And then we have a brilliant copywriter that puts it all together in a format. And she was so clever. She really read everything. This is what impressed me about her. I'm so lucky to have great staff. Is it not just being a good copyright person, but she was interested. And so I gave her artistic license to expand on any sentence, paragraph, or any subject as she saw fit. Give it to me first for final proof, and she was amazing. So that's how basically that happened. Now let's talk about science. How do I discover the formulations and protocol applications that have grown into the cornerstones of DMK? There was never a Eureka moment. I know people like to think that way. because let me tell you the truth. Most cosmetic companies, and this includes people that claim to be in the professional sector, to the estheticians, and yet you go online and you can buy all their products online. That cannot be professional. You know, a professional esthetician or skin practitioner or even aesthetic doctor has to do a proper diagnosis. Everyone is different. Nobody can just pick stuff off the internet. We don't even sell on the internet because of that factor. We cannot do that, but a lot of people do. And as far as the formulations and protocol, my very first formulation was Ciba E and Urban Mineral Mist. And why? Because I was trying to replicate the acid mantle. Those two vital secretions that come up every 2 hours when we're young, or 3, depending on the person, ethnicity, etc., that mock the sudoriferous and the sebaceous oil gland. And they come up every 2 or 3 hours, occlude, form an acid mantle that both is natural moisture and also slightly antibiotic and protective. Now, there's no such thing as moisturizer. That's been sold under that name for thousands of years, and usually it's always a cream. No, that was made up in 1962 by a New York advertising company to sell beauty creams. Creams do not moisturize. They can help lock in, depending on their formulation, if they're water into oil, yes, available moisture. But real moisturizer was born into every baby on this planet via those two glands. So that was my first, what should we do to mock the acid mantle? And then step by step, we worked into the other products. The creams were the same base, but they had special ingredients depending on the skin type, or rather skin condition. I don't believe in types, condition, okay? Just for a quick example, darker toned people, including black people, need to have a lower pH cream that keeps their skin bright and even in tone. And then I had to come up with treatments that got rid of the redundant cuticle, that buildup of dead cells that happens year after year, time after time as we get older. But I didn't want to do it in a big peel thing that would cause trauma. I wanted to do it effectively so the new skin cells underneath the babies that are on view now are kept alive a little bit longer, and that's where the nutritive creams come in, amino acids, proteins, etc. So it was following the body dictate that I formulated each one. The enzyme thing, that actually happened a little bit by accident back in the late 60s. There was a doctor, he passed away years ago. He was a medical chemist and actually an American Indian, so he was very into plants, herbs, things like that. And he was working with enzymes into kind of what he called a lifting type mask. I didn't pay any attention to that. Yet later I got together and worked with him for quite a few years until he died, because he put my thinking into another direction. He really was the mentor in how I thought scientifically, forget products. But he had a stepson that would bring all these weird powders over to my clinic in Newport Beach. And this is shown in the up-and-coming movie about my life called Maybelline Prince. And so I was working with that, adding different things back and forth. It took quite some time. And it wasn't until, I would say 6 years after that, that I realized that it had nothing to do with the enzymes that are in the powders and everything to do with the enzymes inside the skin that this treatment kickstarted and initiated. And we teach that in our education, what those enzymes in the skins are, how they work, protein folding, genetic upregulation, down, all these things that are going on by virtue of this treatment. It's a very specific treatment. It's been copied many times. I can't even tell you, South Africa, Europe, and recently in America, some company has come out with, we have Dannés enzyme mask. It's got the same ingredients almost. Well, guess what? It doesn't, but I'm not going to tell them that. It's not just about putting something on the face that gets dry and tight. That is very little action there. It's what's happening during the 15-minute segments of the application of the enzyme treatments. And that's all explained fully in the education. So those things took a long time to evolve. I tweaked it. I did a lot of changes over the years. it says here how this discovery process and scientific method adapted and changed over time to accommodate DMK's growth. Well, yeah, the growth had a lot to do with it, because in the early days when I started in Europe, we were hand packing the products, hand filling in my little lab, and sending them overseas. And I would go overseas all the time with a little box of slides, showing my before and afters, and I would draw everything about the skin and the scientific aspects of it on a flip chart. My Bible was Gray's Anatomy, 35th British edition. It's still around. These are different versions now. And that's how I built the business, country by country, people by people, result by result. I couldn't do that today at age 80, but I did it back then. It wasn't until I did BioFreeze, which I sold my formula and everything out to my partners, and I sold it to them first for a few $1 million. They sensibly waited for several years and sold it to Big Pharma for something like $40 million each. God, I slap myself every time I see BioFreeze. No, I don't regret it. I used that money to put it into DMK to expand it further and further. And since then, we've hired chemists to work with me on compounding. We've had to homogenize a lot of things. Some of my early hand-mixed things would be slightly unstable, sent overseas. They worked, but they were slightly unstable. I remember when water would evaporate from the jars, from the creams on the trip overseas. And since they were water into oil base, it would leave behind all the lipids, and the goodies were still intact, but it looked like half a product. So in my training manual, it actually says, pour distilled water into this, take a sterile stick and stir it up, and it'll all fluff up again and become a nice aqueous cream. And actually people did that for a long time. Not anymore. When you get real big, you have to be standardized, homogenized, and that takes groups of various chemists and so on. And then lately we've added the genius of Dr. Jayant Lakhande, who is an Ayurvedic chemist, a medical chemist, and a bioengineer. And some of the things that he does, now we're processing our own active raws that nobody else has. We're not buying them from somewhere. That's expanded even further. So basically that's how this company kind of works. DMK's impact and legacy in the aesthetic industry. I would be lying if I didn't tell you that, yes, we have changed, not me personally. I'm only the founder. All of these people around the world have changed aesthetics to what it is today. We have made a mark, and I'm very proud of that, proud of my people. And that's the legacy right there. DMK's philosophy and intellectual discipline is in a league of its own. Yes, we are very particular about who gets certified. We just recently signed a contract with Italy, and I guess they expected that yes, we're a big company in that, but we're very picky about who we take. We're not a billion-dollar company yet, because we don't go online, we don't sell over the counter, we don't just sell products. I could do that. I've been approached by big companies that you know of to formulate, and I would say no, that's not what I do. So it's not stunting the growth, it's making sure that when I finally walk off the stage, this company will go forward as it always has, with emphasis on education, quality, and efficacy and results. Just yesterday, one of our executives, I was at home, I'm getting ready to do big boot camps in New York this weekend, and at Dr. Lakhande, and someone asked, oh, I've been reading on glutathione being a skin brightening ingredient, and there's a lot of evidence and blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, that's true. Glutathione does have some impact on pigmentation if taken orally and with the right precursors, but it takes months to show negligible results. But there are results under any study, but everybody's selling that. And I'm not going to focus on make a product saying contains glutathione. People will look and say, we see that online, or we already taking it, or I go and get IVs with glutathione. So I don't follow trends for trend's sake, because when you have a goal and you're running to that goal, if you look around to see your competition, what happens? You slow down and you are late to your goal, because you're worried about what everybody else is doing. I don't give a flying you know what about what everybody else is doing. God bless. It's a big world. I care what we're doing, and I try to keep the standards as high as possible in that arena. What are my future what are DMK's future aspirations? Space. Now this, you're going to laugh, but it's true. When you go into outer space for any length of time, and we will, and come back, you actually age faster. So already Dr. LeConde and I are sitting down and thinking about what protocols and products should we develop for that. Now there's a lot that goes into that, pressurized, just everything. But it's something that we think about because it will happen. It'll be a market, and we might as well be there, ready to go. What gaps in knowledge or industry capacity do we intend to address? There'll never be a closure of gaps. There'll be people becoming more and more educated and doing things better and more with more efficacy and more results. But there'll always be that big gap. The gap between medical and aesthetics is closed a lot, and we've had a lot to do with that. For instance, in Russia, all of our therapists are dermatologists, same as in Ukraine. Now it's starting to spread to other areas too. That's why we opened up DMK MD division for doctors to include certain protocols in their practice, like Stemzyme. Stemzyme is the world's first, and I mean absolutely first. And this kind of makes me feel weird to realize this is never done before. Using our own stem cells in our own skin to regenerate other stem cells in keratinocytes, melasmasomes, Langerhans, those kind of things, to regenerate the underlying structure of skin. And it's been very successful. It only took 6-7 years to develop and a hell of a lot of money to put together, but we did it. And based on that, we continue going, and that's our part in closing any gaps. And finally, my legacy, and why is it so important? I have to think about that. I've seen myself on covers of many magazines as a legend and blah, 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 and I've had more accolades than a pop star. I've been called rock and roll of aesthetics, the rock star of, I've been called a lot of things. On my 80th birthday, it was like a beyond over-the-top event with people flying in from all over the world, everything lavish at the Biltmore Ballroom. It was like an Academy Awards, even more lavish, and celebrities were there, top surgeons. Everybody came. And they all got up and said, well, Stuart Milk of the Harvey Milk Foundation wrote a poem about me, which was very embarrassing. My own family, including my brother, said nice. Everybody got up and said something. And you know what? I didn't relate to any of it. I keep thinking they're talking about somebody else because I personally live very quietly with my other half in a beautiful estate on top of a hill here in California, my own private resort, and kind of a regular life. I don't see myself as all that. I just get out there and do the work, and I know what's expected when I get up in front of people. I know what's expected now, talking to you through this camera, and I do it. But I do it because it's a message that is nothing to do with just me. It's the entire DMK family worldwide. That's the legacy. And we have people that are third generation DMK people. Their kids take, for instance, like in Southern Ireland, Nicola and her brother. She was a young girl when her mother became a distributor, and her mother retired with her father, and Nicola took over. I have a fiduciary obligation to these people to keep going as long as I can because they're the true legacy. I'm just the person that, in the end, I think of myself as this, as a signpost on a road that people are traveling on, saying, go this way, not that way. Thank you for tuning in, and until we meet again at the next What Does the Next Dannés Say, knowledge is power.